Good afternoon and welcome to the AgrAbility webinar series. Today's topic is Veterans in Agriculture, and our presenter is Martina Moorbacher from the Purdue Military Family Research Institute. My name is Paul Jones and I manage the National AgrAbility Project here at Purdue University. Before we start, just a few basic webinar instructions. Obviously, you will need speakers or headphones to hear the presentation. We're not broadcasting over phone lines, so please check your connection speed if you have not done that already under the Meeting Manage My Settings menu, and dial-up is not recommended for these webinars and is probably not even usable. If you have questions during the presentation concerning the presentation, please type those in the chat window and hit the send icon bubble, and we will discuss those at the end. Also, we have a captioning pod at the bottom. If you would prefer not to see the captions, you can designate that in the window or the drop-down menu that is on the right side of the captioning pod. If you have problems, you can also use the chat window to communicate those technical issues, or you may email cooke@purdue.edu, so you might want to write that down if you anticipate any issues. At the end, we will have 4 quick survey questions, and we also have an evaluation instrument that's from the Military Family Institute that we will provide a link to, and we'd appreciate your participation in both of those evaluation methods, please. We are recording this webinar, and we will be posting it on the agrability.org website under the online training link. In fact, the PowerPoint presentation is already available on that link, so if you go to agrability.org, go to the online training link on the main menu and go to archived webinars, you should be able to access the PowerPoint. For those that are not familiar with AgrAbility, we are sponsored by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and our main focus is assisting farmers, ranchers, and other agricultural workers with disabilities. Every AgrAbility project is a partnership between one of the land-grant universities and at least one nonprofit disability organization. Currently, there are 23 projects covering 25 states. The National AgrAbility Project is currently housed at Purdue University in the Breaking New Ground Resource Center, and we partner with Goodwill Industries International, the Arthritis Foundation Indiana chapter, and the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. If you'd like more information about AgrAbility, please visit our website at www.agrability.org. Just a quick promo for those that are interested in this topic. We are holding an Veterans in Agriculture workshop, an in-person workshop here at Purdue, November 7th and 8th at the Beck Agricultural Center, which is just outside of our campus. And if you'd like more information on that, you can visit the link at breakingnewground.info/vets, and we'll make that link available at the end of the presentation also. At this time, I'd like to turn things over to Martina Moorbacher, who will begin our presentation. And again, if you have questions, please put those in the chat window, and we will address those at the end.
Good afternoon. My name is Martina Moorbacher. As Paul said, I work for the Military Family Research Institute at Purdue University, and I'm an outreach specialist with Operation Diploma, and I'm going to tell you a little bit later what that is. On my first slide, you see an overview of the things I would like to talk about today. First, I would like to introduce the Military Family Research Institute at Purdue University and our goals and activities to you. Then I would like to focus our attention on the U.S. military and veterans of recent conflicts. And then as a last point, I would like us to talk a little bit about readjustment issues and strategies for those that come back from the service and reintegrate into the civilian world. First, a little bit about the Military Family Research Institute at Purdue University. The Military Family Research Institute has been founded in 2000 and has been based since then at Purdue University campus. It began with funding from the Department of Defense, but over time, more and more funders found their way to us, and with more funders, also our mission increased and the types of programs changed and expanded over time. We still remain partially funded by the Department of Defense, but our main funder at this point in time is the Lilly Endowment. MFRI is working with all branches of the military and individual programs, but we also have programs that go across branches, which is what we call purple programs. Our goals are to support the military infrastructures that support military families. So you could say we're a service provider to the service providers. We try to work with civilian communities to strengthen their motivation and capacity to assist military families. We do research and thus generate important new knowledge around military families, which we then put to use. We work on influencing policies, programs, and practices to support military families, and then as an organization we try to create and sustain a vibrant learning organization. Here are a few programs that I wanted to show you that Military Family Research Institute is involved in. On the left-hand top, you see Passport Towards Success, helping military kids and families connect. This is a program working with children of military families who have been separated due to deployments, and it has components that also helps military kids reconnect with a loved one that returns from deployments. Underneath that, you see a program that's called Talk, Listen, Connect, which has been created by the Sesame Workshop, which is the non-profit sector of Sesame Street programs. And this program specifically targets children of military families who have to cope either with deployments or with living with a wounded family member due to military service, or even have to cope with the death of a family member due to military service. MFRI has been involved with this program by doing evaluations of the program success. And then the last program that you see on the right-hand side is one of our newest outreach programs. It's called STAR Behavioral Health Providers. And it's a program that has two goals, basically. On the one hand, we're training private behavioral health providers to understand military issues better and thus be better able to serve military service members and also their families. And then the second goal is the program also creates a registry that is publicly available where military service members and their family members can find those providers who have received the training and can make appointments with them and find them this way. Here are two examples of how we generate new knowledge. Those are two books that have been published through MFRI. On the left-hand side, you see a compilation of clinical issues and strategies related to military families, which has been designed for professionals working with military families. And then on the right-hand side, you see a textbook that's used in family studies. You can see the name Shelley McDermott Wadsworth on both of the books, on one side as an editor and the other side as a co-author. She is a faculty member at Purdue University and also the director of the Military Family Research Institute. And then at last, I want to talk a little bit about Operation Diploma, which is the initiative I'm working in. Operation Diploma was created in 2008, specifically to work with student service members and veterans to help them achieve their academic goals and transition from school into meaningful employment later on. So we're basically the post-secondary education initiative of the Military Family Research Institute. Now I would like to talk a little bit about the U.S. military and veterans of recent conflicts and what's special about them. First, you see here the 5 military branches listed. And for the sake of this discussion, I included the Coast Guard in this table, although the Coast Guard does not belong to the DoD, but it belongs to the Department of Homeland Security. But for the sake of this discussion, it makes no difference. As you can see, all the branches have an active duty part and a reserves part. You can also see the Army is by far the largest branch. It's also the oldest. When we look at the two different categories, active duty means that service members that are in active duty basically have a full-time job being military members. People that are in the reserve typically have constant training on a regular basis, but they have other civilian jobs, but they can be called out for service at any point in time. There's also the National Guard that I would like to mention. Two of the branches have National Guard. We have the Army National Guard and the Air National Guard. Typically, or not typically, the National Guard is not federal, it's state National Guard. So it usually reports to the governor of a state, unless, like in cases of necessity, the President of the United States can request the National Guard to become federal, which happened during the last 2 conflicts. So currently the National Guard is considered under federal command. What's very specific about the National Guard is members of the National Guard are very often described as citizen soldiers, which means they actually do have full-time jobs in the civilian world, but they train on a regular basis, typically once a month for a weekend, and then for one extended period of time once a year. And they can be called up for service at any point in time. In the recent conflicts that we have seen, many National Guard service members have been deployed. On average, we currently see about 63,000 National Guard members either deployed or mobilized to potentially be deployed. And then we also see around 6,000 National Guard members typically at any given point in time activated for domestic missions, which is when they are on under state command, their typical duty. When we talk about military culture, there are a couple of things I want to talk about. First of all, in the military, most of the service members have very strong values. There's a very high group cohesiveness. Service members typically take a lot of pride in their service to the United States, but also in their specific branch they're serving in. And very often military members sort of have their own special lingo, which sometimes makes it very hard for civilians to understand. They even in their own branches have their own sort of language for certain things. They have expressions that they only use in one branch and not in another. So that sometimes can make it a little bit difficult for civilians to understand. You can also see at the logos here certain core values that the individual branches take pride in, like Army Strong or the few, the proud, the Marines. So these are things that are very important for service members. Shortly after 9/11, the global war on terror, or the so-called global war on terror, started. And since then, approximately 2.4 million U.S. service members have been deployed to OIF, Operation Iraqi Freedom, and OEF, Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan. we have seen more than 1.4 service members in that time period transition from a military active duty or National Guard or Reserve status to civilian status and civilian employment, hopefully. Of those, about half have used, for whatever reason, VA healthcare, and some of the numbers you will later on see are based on those that have used VA healthcare after they changed from an active status to a civilian status. The next point is very important. I want to stress that over the next 5 years, due to bringing the conflict in Iraq to a close and also the foreseeable drawdown in Afghanistan, we will see about 1 million or more service member transition over to the civilian status. So that's very important to know. There will be a large number of people transitioning. Now when we look at consequences of deployment, and you look at the statistics I gave you there, you see that compared to previous wars, we don't see as many service members dying in the field during deployment. The ratio of people that die as opposed to those who get wounded looks much better than in World War II or in comparison to Vietnam. Also, of those who do get wounded, fewer die of their wounds, which these numbers are caused by several factors. For one thing, wars are fought differently nowadays than they have been, but then also body armor has been very much improved over time, and medical services, especially medical services received in the field, the time that elapses between being wounded and being transported to a facility where you really can be helped, all of that has very much improved, and therefore the numbers look much better than in previous conflicts and wars. On the other side, that also means we have more people coming back from deployments with serious injuries and disabilities. This is something to bear in mind. Also, when we look at a little bit more of the statistics, during the recent conflicts, we had far over 3 million deployments, resulting in multiple deployments for individuals. So we have many service members who have deployed 2, 3, 4, some even 5 and 6 times, which then also means that increases the risk with each deployment of getting injured or suffering from attacks, things like that. We had, since the conflicts began, over 6,500 deaths, and unfortunately I have to say, since we uploaded this presentation, the death toll unfortunately has risen. We had almost 50,000 cases of people wounded in action, and we had over 70,000 medical transports during that time. The main reason for injury or death in these conflicts are explosive devices. So the very infamous IEDs, the improvised explosive devices that are talked about a lot, are in many cases responsible. Also things like mortars and things like that. When we talk about these kind of things, being a victim of an explosive device, there's sort of a mechanic that happens when people sustain blast injuries. We have several layers of impact on the human body when they get too close to a blast. We have a primary impact, which would be overpressure of the blast wave that hits you. This mainly targets like soft tissue organs, things like eardrums or lungs that collapse due to the blast wave, things like that. Then secondary, we have a lot of flying debris from basically whatever object has been blown up, but then also everything else in the vicinity, also a lot of dirt, stones, sticks, these kind of things flying around, hitting people. On a third level, we have body displacement, so the victims get thrown into stationary objects. Many serious injuries will be sustained by that. And then on a fourth level, we have injuries that don't fall in the first three categories, like, for example, burns or toxic inhalations of diesel fumes, things like that. Also, people who get too close to blasts very often sustain several types of injuries. Typically, it's not only one. For example, in most cases, when somebody suffers a head trauma, it typically goes along with fractures, sensory deficits that are acquired, things like that. Resulting from these types of injuries, in many cases, are service-connected disabilities. What I put together for you here are the numbers of the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs latest benefits report. So these numbers are from 2011, published this year. What I listed here are the top 5 disabilities that people receive benefits for. At the top, you see the majority receives benefits for musculoskeletal disabilities, which would be things to do with knees, back strain, these kind of disabilities. Then, secondly, they see a lot of skin injuries and disabilities resulting from that, scars from burns, eczemas, such things. On third place, auditory disabilities. I talked about before, blast waves, very often eardrums get hurt. So a lot of tinnitus, cases of hearing loss. And then in fourth place, you have mental disabilities like PTSD, depression, and then also neurological conditions, which would be something like migraines or sciatic nerves getting hurt, things like that. When you look at this, there are several things that might be a little bit surprising when you look at the statistics. First, it seems in the media there's a lot of talk about mental health issues of service members that come back, yet you only see those in fourth place here. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but one thing I wanted you to know is that the ratings that people get for disabilities are typically higher for mental disabilities than they are for example, musculoskeletal or skin injuries. And then also mental health issues are much harder to diagnose than some of the others that are listed here. So we have a safe assumption that there is a lot of cases that are not diagnosed. So that is one thing I wanted to talk about. The other thing that might be a little bit surprising looking at this is you don't see amputations listed here, which is also something when you follow media reports about the conflicts. You see many cases where you see pictures and stories of veterans with amputations, but in fact the number of amputations is comparatively low. Until the middle of 2011, we had about not quite 1,300 cases of amputations of service members. So that's something that might be more visible because it's a more visible disability, but it doesn't show up here. I just wanted to point that out. What is resulting from many of these disabilities that I just talked about is physical pain. Basically, all of the disabilities and body systems that we talked about previously can cause physical pain, and almost a third of all OEF and OIF veterans experience chronic pain. That can be due to, again, blast injuries, but also on a day-to-day basis while being outside of the wire, so outside of the safe compounds. Service members have to wear their full gear, which weighs about 100 pounds. and they have to wear this gear for many, many hours at a time and do very strenuous activities like running, jumping, taking cover, these kind of things, and that wears a lot on joints, on the back, these kind of things. So a lot of pain also results from that. Now I would like to focus my attention a little bit on mental health issues. As I said before, there is a lot of underdiagnosing going on in that field, and we don't have exact numbers. Depending on what studies you read, there is a guess we have between 20 and 40% of combat veterans experiencing mental health issues. And here's a list from the Center of Deployment Psychology of the most pertinent mental health issues that they see in their practice, which is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, depressions, suicide, substance use or abuse, sleep issues, and then TBI, traumatic brain injuries. When we talk about post-traumatic stress or post-traumatic stress disorder, we have to really make a difference between post-traumatic stress, which is a normal response to exposure to extreme and emotionally charged events, which could be a car accident, it could be experiencing violence in terms of being attacked in the street, it could be witnessing something that is very extreme or emotionally charged. So it could be anything. It also includes obviously combat situations. But experiencing post-traumatic stress is a very normal reaction, and many people can attest to that who have been in car accidents and such things. Then we have post-traumatic stress disorder, which is an actual anxiety disorder that can follow these traumatic events. It is not necessarily the case that everybody who experiences post-traumatic stress is also going to develop a disorder. In many cases, the post-traumatic stress gets less and less with time, and no disorder is being developed. When we look at the estimate of incidences of PTSD, we do see, however, that incidences are much higher with OIF combat troops as compared to the civilian population. Next, I would like to show you a video, and I have two things to say. Your screen is going to change, so please bear with us while we change to the video. The other thing I would like to say here is we're going to watch the video. It's not going to contain any graphic scenes of violence or anything like that, but it's going to be a scene, a highly stressful car traffic scene in a very busy road with a lot of cars honking, and it's very stressful to watch. So if you had bad experiences in situations like that and don't feel you want to watch that, or you might get stressed out by that, the caption is going to be about 2.5 minutes long, so you might just take a break for about 2.5 minutes and join us after that.
Oncoming, maybe? Yeah, there you go, stay to the left.
The reason why I wanted you to watch this video is I wanted to show you, this is a rather typical scene for driving in a combat area, and I wanted you to see how much stress deployed soldiers or deployed service members can experience in a combat zone without actually being attacked, without anything blowing up. This scene, we don't know if this is the first car in a whole convoy or if this is a lone vehicle, but the person who's driving this car and might do this every day, maybe several times a day, is responsible for the safety and security of everybody else in his vehicle and potentially for those in vehicles right behind him or her. So I wanted to show you that if this happens very often over an extended period of time and somebody has to cope with these kind of things, it still can make a big impression on a person, and it might be difficult to come back and just get used to driving on the interstate without actually having had any kind of direct combat contact. So when we look at PTSD symptoms, typically they're categorized in 3 different categories. First, we have intrusive memories, which would include flashbacks, reliving the traumatic events, nightmares, these kind of things. Then we have avoidance and numbing. The person who's experiencing PTSD doesn't want to talk about the event, has problems with memory, feels hopeless, also feels emotionally numb, or is not able to feel the same emotions or emotionally connected to what's going on around him or her in the civilian world. And then we have, as a third category, increased anxiety or hyperarousal. So people get irritable, angry, they show self-destructive behavior like driving way too fast, drinking too much, engaging in dangerous sports, these kind of things. People get easily startled or frightened. Those are typical symptoms that we see with PTSD. Now I would like to talk a little bit about the other so-called signature injury of these past conflicts, traumatic brain injury, TBI. Typically, a traumatic brain injury is sustained by a bump, a jolt, a blow to the head, or maybe a penetrating head injury that disrupts normal brain functioning. For service members, traumatic brain injury, again, very often results from improvised explosive devices, mortars, grenades, bullets, these kind of things. When we look at incidences of TBI, what's very interesting is we have diagnosed, and I specifically say diagnosed, by the VA until 2010, roughly 45,600 cases. However, we have in the United States every year about 1.4 million cases of diagnosed TBIs. To this, I also have to add, as I said before, in many cases, TBIs go undiagnosed. In many cases, they are not reported if they were experienced. So there is a high probability that there are many more cases as have been diagnosed. The second thing I would like to say is Most of these TBIs are mild TBIs, about 85% in both groups, in the civilian group as well as in the veteran groups, are mild TBIs. So those are injuries that you would typically maybe call a concussion, and usually the effects wear off rather quickly over time. But there is a percentage where the effects will not wear off, and people will sustain lasting damage. Typical symptoms of TBI or mild TBI are headaches, fatigue, lethargy. You can read the list. One of the biggest problems with that is that many symptoms don't show up right after the incidents. They can, but sometimes they are delayed, so they show up only days, sometimes weeks or months later, which again makes our diagnosis and treatment really difficult. One other thing that is very important that I wanted to mention, there's a high comorbidity, especially of TBIs and PTSD. And we can also see quite a bit of overlap in the symptoms that people show with both of these injuries. There would also be, you could add some other mental health issues where we would also see overlap with symptoms, which again speaks to the fact that some of those are really hard to get a diagnosis for. And now we're coming to the third part of my presentation. I would like to talk about readjustment. So going from the service member status to the veteran status, and there are three points that I would like to stress. First, dealing with disabilities. Then I would like to look at employment, and then I would like to talk about veterans in agriculture and in rural areas. So first, talking about disability, disability in veterans. There are several concepts of disabilities that you can find depending on what background you're talking about disability. When you look at public or media concepts, you find concepts ranging from very much focused on the medical side, so very much focused on what kind of medical issues a person might experience, to a description of people with disabilities that is very tragic or pitiful, these kind of descriptions. Or you might find also often related in reports about veterans, this sort of heroic kind of image or inspirational kind of image, the strong person who overcomes all the difficulties despite the disability type of story. So these are the typical public or media concepts that we see. When we talk about the military, it is very important to talk about that while people are on active duty in the military, being fit for duty is very, very important, because if you're not fit for duty, you're not able to do your job. So being injured, having a disability, getting sick, puts you at risk of not being able to perform your job. And so very often we see in the military this kind of soldier on kind of mentality where people do not want to show weakness. Then when we look at the VA, they have a rating system to rate disability. This rating system is expressed in percentage, ranging from 0%, which would basically be a condition that they can diagnose that exists, but is not disabling enough to be to require the VA to compensate somebody for that disability, up to 100%, or in some cases, if people have multiple disabilities, you can actually have a rating that goes over 100%, so you can be 120% disabled. And the steps, it goes in 10% increments, the rating. The studies at the University of Arizona in their student veteran population have shown that within the veteran community, they sort of have their own hierarchy of disability, which basically means disabilities that have been acquired while serving in combat are regarded sort of more honorable than disabilities that have been acquired while performing normal service duties, which would then be again trumping disabilities that were acquired while somebody was not on duty but had a private accident or something like that. When we look at veterans' attitudes to disability, and I have to immediately say this is a vast generalization, so I'm fully aware that individuals might feel completely different than people have expressed in studies. So this is again a generalization, but in general we find that there is a reluctance to identify as disabled, which at the same time goes along very often with the need or the wish to get a high disability rating from the VA, because to get benefits you need to get a higher rating. So the higher your rating, the higher your benefits, and people might depend on the benefits and the help they get from the VA. So sometimes that can put veterans in sort of a difficult situation. We see a lot of service orientation and cohort mentality in veterans, which sometimes leads to an attitude, I don't need a service, my buddy next to me needs it more than I do, which sometimes can cause problems. We see studies have shown low self-management skills in many veterans compared to other groups. And then in terms of language, very often veterans don't like terminology around disabilities, so very often you see wounded warrior or injured, something like that. We look at specific issues. We have to bear in mind that disability is newly acquired for this group. So that comes along with lack of knowledge of accommodations and services that are available. And typically, individuals are not familiar with mitigating skills like reading Braille, using technology, these kind of things. Now I would like to focus a little bit on employment. When you look at the statistic on your screen, you can see that when you compare the unemployment numbers for veterans and civilians, you can see that in every category the veteran unemployment rate is higher than in the civilian category. It varies depending on age and gender that we're looking at, but in general and overall we can say veteran unemployment is higher than civilian unemployment, and it is in general on a very high level. When we now look at employment by disability status, and those graphs you see show only the employment status of veterans with disability, you can see that veterans with a disability have about a 10% lower rate of being employed than veterans that do not have disability. And I believe not very surprisingly, we can also see the more severe the disability, the less likely is it that a person is employed. However, veterans bring a lot of very desirable workplace skills when they transition from the military to the civilian world. Some of them have been listed here. Many of them are hard skills, but there are also a lot of soft skills that employers typically look for, like leadership, problem solving, discipline, these kind of things. When we talk about employment and training, I wanted to very quickly point out the legal framework for that. The two major laws that are very important for veteran employment are the Uniform Service Employment and Re-Employment Rights Act, USERRA, that regulates basically people coming back from service and getting reintegrated in their old jobs. And then also the work opportunity tax credit, which has special provisions for hiring veterans with a disability. The employer can get tax credits for that. When we look at training, there are several laws that are really important here. One is Chapter 31, VOC Rehab. That is very important, that many of you might be familiar with, that helps veterans to get training, especially veterans with disability, to get training for employment. But then also the post 9/11 GI Bill, Chapter 33, funding and REAP, which would be Chapter 1607 for the Reserves and National Guard. This is funding that can be used for post-secondary education for employment. So not only for college, but also for various types of certificates, these kind of things. And there are also many states, statewide programs where people can get money from to do training for employment. So there are various sources that veterans can look at. In the last step, I would also like to take a look now at the impact of the conflicts on the rural areas. What we see is we have a very disproportional share, about a third of OEF, OIF service members that come from rural areas. That is compared to the overall population, a high share, a very high share. So you see that many veterans after serving come back to the rural areas. Also, when we think about who is it that might go and serve the United States in the conflicts, it's very often people that are stable after rural communities, like firemen, like people that drive your ambulances, people like that are very often prone to do service. When living in rural areas, veterans often have less access to medical services like psychotherapy, but also the next VA hospital sometimes it's just very far away. But on the positive side, rural areas offer therapeutic environments for healing and reintegrating wounded warriors. That's something we should think about using more. When we talk about veterans in agriculture, we have about 6.1 million veterans living in rural communities, and a lot has been done recently around the veteran community. A lot of things have been installed and changed. USDA has founded their Veterans Employment Program Office in the 2012 Farm Bill that might or might not go through Congress. We've seen changes. The veterans are now acknowledged as a minority group of their own, with their own needs in the Farm Bill. We see a variety of farming programs targeted towards veterans, and we see more and more loan programs for new farmers, especially targeting the veteran population. When we look at programs and activities, we see a multitude of for-profit and non-for-profit training and educational and therapeutical programs come up. And I just listed the biggest or best known ones, like Archie's Acres or the Veterans Farmers Project. Several universities like Michigan State have programs like Vets to Ag added to their programs. We have also interest groups becoming more influential, like the Pharma Veteran Coalition. And then I wanted to mention therapeutic horticulture, which is something that more and more people pay attention to. As my last slide, I wanted to sort of share some takeaways with you. So if you remember nothing else of what I said today, it would be nice if you could remember these few points. So again, about 1 million service members will make the transition to the civilian world over the next 5 years. Many service members do leave the service with varying degrees of disability. Veterans have specific reintegration issues and needs. Veteran unemployment rate is still very high. and rural areas are very critical for veteran reintegration. Before I turn it over to Paul, I just wanted to add, I added several slides to my presentation of resources for you, where you can see to several topics that I talked about today, resources where you can do some further reading. Also, I have several slides of references, so all the things I said today, all the materials I referenced are listed there, so you can go there and also look things up and several.
Martina, thanks very much for that excellent presentation. During our question and answer period, if you would like to ask a question, please type that into the chat window at the bottom and hit that little bubble icon to enter that in. While we are waiting for questions, we would like to do some of our poll questions right now to get your feedback on the session. So I will open the first one at this point. And this asks about your professional affiliation. And we realize you may be in more than one category, but if you could go ahead and click the best choice in those areas, that would be helpful to us. I'll give you just a minute to work on that. Again, we will be connecting you to another external link for the Military Family Institute's evaluation survey, and we would appreciate it if you would go ahead and follow that link after we're done with the questions and answers, and we can get some further feedback through that mechanism. Okay, it looks like we've got pretty good response on that poll. The next poll question involves regarding the information that was presented. Please let us know if you felt that the information presented today was valuable and met your expectations. We'll give you a little bit more time to work on that. Okay, thank you for your feedback. The next question, number 3 out of 4, asks about the technology that was used today. Please let us know if it worked for you. I think several people may have had difficulty getting kicked out of the webinar, and if that was the case, if you would let us know through the chat window, that might be helpful. This is actually a new version of the webinar software, the first time we've used it, and I know there are always some potential glitches. So if you could give us some specific feedback as to anything specific that happened during the session that was a problem, we'd appreciate knowing that. Okay, thank you very much for your feedback on that. And then our final question. Involves, based on today's session, I would attend another session in this series. Okay, thank you very much. this point, I will turn things back over to Martina for questions. And again, at the end, we will ask you to do the Military Family Institute survey instrument. And I have pasted that down in the bottom left. It says MFRI Evaluation Survey. And when we're finished with the questions and answers, if you would click the Browse to, you'll be taken directly to that. There are also web links for the archived webinar, which should be up this afternoon, the recording and the PowerPoint. Currently, the PowerPoint is already up. And then finally, the breakingnewground.info/vets link is also listed in the web links box if you want more information on the workshop at Purdue in November. So I will turn things over to Martina now. Thank you very much.
Hi, you're back with me again. I saw there was one question, and I'm going to read the questions out loud for the person who is doing the captioning. The question was, does any of this information apply to non-military federal employees deployed to an active combat zone? Most of the statistics I showed you would not include those people, simply because most of my statistics comes from the VA, so they would not be included in that. I would assume, though, most of the things I talked about in terms of issues service members experience while deployed or after deployment would apply to that group the same way as they do for service members. I hope that answers your question. Please ask any more questions. We have several people typing, so just bear with us for just a second so I have time to receive the questions. I think I see a question here in my, chat box. How about resources available to non-military? I think that, like, for example, the program I talked about at the beginning that the Military Family Research Institute is working on, the STAR Behavioral Health Providers, also federal employees that are non-military that have the same issues could at any point in time also contact, for example, those health providers that have been trained. I think it probably is a problem if you look for resources through the VA other than things that they make publicly available through websites and things like that. But I would also assume a lot of the research and assistance that has been given to finding out more about the effects of PTSDs and TBIs should also be available to non-military members. For example, I know that the VA has done a lot in terms of prepping up their research about PTSD. I think they have more than doubled their the money they spend on research on that particular issue over the last 5 years. So that is something that eventually will also help other groups connected to those. Then I can see there is a question about what is big programs that helps veterans become involved in farming. It's a training program. It's actually been founded, as far as I know, by by a veteran and his wife. They're out in California, I believe, and I think the link, you will also find the link to Archie's Acres in the resources I gave you, so you can go to the website and look. But it's a training program that teaches veterans to become involved in farming. They can learn about certain techniques there, but also about what does it take to run a farm and these kind of things. It also has, I believe, some therapeutic components to it. And I got the sign that said last question. So again, thank you very, very much for participating and for letting me talk about this topic that is very dear and near to my heart. Again, please take the time to go to our link and do our evaluation. I promise it's not going to take longer than 5 minutes. So please do take the 5 minutes. It's going to help us improve our programs for future presentations like this one. So thank you very much also on behalf of AgrAbility, and I hope you have a nice afternoon wherever you are.